Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you as I always do from my little nutshell of infinite space right here in the Wood of the Holly. And today, across this little digital divide, I have an incredible guest. He is the Reb in residence, the rabbi in residence at one of the most important cultural institutions right here in the land of law. That's the Skirball Center, newly appointed, elected, chosen, what have you. He's with me here today. I want to extend a warm and really, I'm all excited on pins and needles, a warm greeting to Rabbi Beau Shapiro. How you doing?
I'm wonderful, Bill. Thank you. I should take you on the road with me to introduce me anywhere I go.
Well,
I think it's all going to be downhill from here.
Well, I need the booking, so I check my calendar right now, and I'm available for the rest of my life. So
travel expenses are on you.
Okay, good. First question, or first sort of kickoff. I'm looking across this, and I see you in the puff jacket, this incredibly handsome, well-adjusted guy, defying every stereotype I could conceivably imagine of a Reb.
No, I'm usually wearing a suit.
Well, either way, you defy the stereotype. As I read, you're from those silver surf strands of Santa Barbara up there, and that's probably the most bucolic piece of California real estate imaginable. I know because I go up there and surf at Rincon. Tell me about your journey from Santa Barbara to the pulpit downtown Los Angeles. How does that happen?
There's an old joke that behind every successful child are two absolutely astonished parents. No one, believe me, thought that I was destined for the rabbit. I grew up, I'm an only child. I grew up in a family that I would say it's like, the overwhelming majority of, certainly of non-Orthodox Jewish families, Los Angeles. We were members of a synagogue that we never went to. I had a bar mitzvah, like literally kicking and screaming. Knew we were Jewish. We did Seder. We did Hanukkah. I had two Jewish parents and a Christmas tree. And I knew, it's funny, I was saying to somebody the other day, I knew that there were Jews that didn't eat bacon. I don't know why they didn't eat bacon, but they didn't eat bacon and they didn't eat like shellfish. The idea of like milk and meat being a thing, no clue. Like I remember being like 17, that like cheeseburgers were a no-no. But kicking and screaming, but the bar mitzvah actually was sort of a transformative experience for me. I enjoyed like being on the bima and leading the service. Not like I was going to do it every week for the rest of my life, and I hung around for whatever reason in kind of the post-B'nai Mitzvah program at the synagogue in Santa Barbara. And I wanted to do confirmation. Confirmation kind of had an era of, I'll stop just short of cool, but it was that at night, the rabbi taught it, and it culminated with a trip to Washington, D.C.
Oh.
And so I did that. And then kind of late to the party, I got involved with Jewish Youth Group, with NIFTY, which is the Reform Movement's youth group, because of a girl. It's always about a girl, right?
Yeah.
And I, on a lark, went to the NIFTY North American Convention, which that year was being held in Los Angeles, which was 2,000 Jewish high school kids from across the country and Canada, taking over the LAX Hilton for a long weekend. And I was like in awe that, I grew up in a relatively small town where I had to explain to my teachers that I was missing school for Yom Kippur, and that wasn't the one with the matzah. And here, like, everybody was Jewish. And I was definitely not one of the popular kids in high school. And here was the space in which, like, I'd be walking down the hall and just random people would say hello to me. It'd be nice. Or I could say, like, it was odd, not, why are you talking to me? And I was like, I want more of this. This is great. So I kind of jumped off the deep end into youth group. that led me, I played guitar, I still play guitar. That led me to deciding that I wanted to spend a summer at the Reform Movement's then, it's now closed, unfortunately, then Leadership Institute for Teens, the Kutz Camp in upstate New York. So I went off to New York for a month between my junior and senior year in high school to learn how to be a Jewish camp song leader and a bunch of other stuff. And it was life changing. It was the first time that I really encountered Judaism on my terms and realized that this was something that like could be a part of my life because I wanted it to be a part of my life, not because it was thrust upon me or given to me. I often call most of us who are born Jewish Jews by accident, right? Like, and I didn't leave that summer thinking I was going to be a rabbi, but I met that summer someone, named Michael Friedman. He's a rabbi in Westport, Connecticut now. We're still very close. He was like a second-year rabbinic student, I think, at the time. He grew up in Great Neck. He went to Yale. He was a scratch golfer. He dressed reasonably well. And I was like, oh, you're like a seemingly normal human being that's a lot like me. You're like in school to be a rabbi? Huh, who knew? Because I thought rabbis were, old guys with beards. All due respect to my childhood rabbi. And it was like, I'm never going to do that. I want a real job. But, oh, okay. It's like a thing that people do. It's a thing that people do, just like you go to medical school or law school or business school, you go to rabbinical school. And I did my undergraduate work at USC, Southern California, not South Carolina.
Right.
I have to clarify because I have family in South Carolina.
Okay.
That when I told them I was going to USC, said, "Oh, great, you're coming home." I went to USC. I was a Judaic Studies major. My first class, 9 a.m. Monday morning, was Hebrew. I was also a film student in the film school, and loved it. And again, was very passionate about the Jewish space and had a job as a Sunday morning religious school song leader. I loved all that, but I wanted a real job because I wanted a plane. I still want a plane, but I really wanted a plane and like a 30,000 square foot house in the hills. And yeah, I was going to go to law school and either be an entertainment attorney or run CAA, run the agency. I wanted Richard Lovett's job,
Okay.
which I've told him on a few occasions. I think
The apex predators of Hollywood are the agents.
I think he told me I'm better off, but it's interesting actually. When I was at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, our senior rabbi Steve Leader for many years did a bi-monthly Torah study in Century City, and CAA was kind enough to give him a conference room to do it in. And whenever he couldn't do it, I would sub for him. And I used to walk in there and kind of chuckle to myself and think, "Hey, I made it to CAA. I just had no idea we'd be to teach Torah."
Well, I wonder if it's curious coincidence that the Wilshire Boulevard Temple and the La Brea Tar Pits and CEA are, within a stone's throw. And I often thought that the apex predators that found their way into the tar pits, meaning the saber-toothed cats,
Yep.
The apex predators are now just down the street over at CAA.
But somewhere along the way there, I decided that the world didn't need another, miserable Jewish attorney, much less entertainment agent. My sophomore year, I had moved to Santa Monica, and I was looking for a new gig on Sunday mornings because I didn't like schlepping out to the valley, and they weren't paying me enough. And I was stopped at the red light at Olympic in Barrington one day, and I looked to my left, and I saw Wilshire Boulevard Temple, Audrey and Sidney Irma's campus. Huh, I should work here. This is close. And I cold called the then religious school director, a wonderful, wonderful Israeli woman, blessed memory, Anat Ben Ishai, who finally interviewed me and took a chance on me and hired me as the music teacher. Back then it was Sundays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and the occasional Friday. I grew up in a synagogue with 500 families and one rabbi, and it was the only synagogue in town. The idea of a synagogue with 2 rabbis, much less back then 5, was unthinkable to me. And a lot of people talk about large synagogues like Wilshire Boulevard Temple as being corporate, and they mean it in a bad way. Um, I always thought it was a good thing. The idea that you could have colleagues, the idea that similar to a law firm, like I could open my office door and there'd be three other rabbis and I could shout across the hall and say, "Oh God, I just agreed to do this podcast with this guy, Bill Collinson, like he's out of his mind. Like, what do I tell him, right? Or whatever, right? Get to pick people's brains." Um, and that it wouldn't be lonely. I think I imagined the rabbinate, particularly in Santa Barbara, as being lonely. And the idea that one could have a portfolio and not have to do everything because there was a colleague to do, you know, camp in the summer and another colleague to do, adult programming. And I could focus on, in my case, it was social service work and social justice work and outreach to immersion students and a bunch of other things. Um, and over the course of those few years, I started to think, okay, the world doesn't need another entertainment attorney. And if I could be a rabbi at a place like this, that could be very interesting. Long story short, kind of rolled the dice, figured if it didn't work out, I could always go to law school. Um, Went to rabbinical school, did my first year in Jerusalem, came back to Los Angeles. My remaining 4 years here on the Los Angeles campus of the Hebrew Union College. I worked at Wilshire all through rabbinical school. I was an intern there. I worked my way to a job there that I never interviewed for. I was a pulpit rabbi there for 13 years. But I was there 20 years in total, which is crazy. It's half my life, 40 years old. I left 7 months ago, 8 months ago. And, so far I haven't decided to apply to law school and
Good.
take it back.
Here's a question for you, and it's always
Yeah.
was growing up. I grew up in the Valley. My big goals were to be good at baseball, make the Dodgers. Didn't happen. I resisted.
Yet?
Not yet. I resisted religious education. I was bar mitzvahed. I did have a great relationship with a rabbi. You probably know him, Steve Jacobs. And here's a question I have or thought. Where does monotheism, which is at the base ground level of what Judaism is about, I believe it's the big revolutionary leap forward, it's the primal gift of being Jewish, sort of resides, and spirituality live? Because I never found anything. What is spirituality within the Jewish thing? Is it can't? I mean, it's like reminds me of a girl asked me, "Bill, are you spiritual?" And I go, "Yeah, I got a few candles. Sure, I'm spiritual." And those two convergences must have had a claim on you for you to make the life choice you made. So I'm just curious because I struggle with it.
It's a great question. I'm going to do what rabbis love to do, which is answer the question I want to answer, not the one you asked. No, I'll answer it, but maybe in a roundabout way, which is to say, for the second part first, which is to say, for me, it's funny. I appreciate you asking the question, "What was the journey that led me here?" as opposed to the question, "So, why do you want to be a rabbi?" Because that's actually for me not a more difficult question to answer, but a little more difficult to articulate. And jokingly, I remember saying in preparing for my admissions interview at the Hebrew Union College, I think they had told me in advance, like the first question was going to be, so Mr. Shapiro, why do you want to be a rabbi? And I remember sharing this with a non-Jewish friend of mine. He said, "Well, can't you just tell them that why do you want to be a rabbi? You felt like you were called." And I said to him, "Yeah, that doesn't work. Like, forget that that's not how I really feel. Although now I actually, looking back, maybe feel differently." I said, "That might work at Yeshiva University." I said, "But at the Hebrew Union College, like a bunch of academics are going to say, that's lovely, but why do you want to be a rabbi?" Like, right? And so for me, it was not really a theological decision. In fact, my theology has evolved and continues to evolve, as I think anyone's does and should. Um, For me, it was very much about people and about community. And I alluded to this saying that I felt that I had found this community that I was embraced by, that I wanted to be a part of, that I wanted to continue to have as central in my life. One need not be a rabbi for that to be the case. I felt like we were living in a time 20 years ago, but I think it's still true today, living in a time in which everyone's searching for community.
Mm.
For Jews, a natural place to look is Jewish community. The overwhelming majority of Jews, not to exponentially more so for my generation and now a generation younger than me, the status quo is, I'll be kind, the status quo does not resonate. And I felt like there was change beginning to happen in the Jewish community, in what it looked like, and what synagogues looked like, and what the broader community looks like. One need not be a professional Jew to be a part of that, but I thought to have a hand in shaping that from the perspective of a rabbi would be interesting. And it's interesting. I said to someone recently that I still feel that way 20 years later, which maybe means I didn't do a very good job for the first 20 years. I don't know. I still feel like, the status quo in the Jewish community doesn't speak to the overwhelming majority of Jews, right? The Federation here in Los Angeles released a study last year. 84% of Jews in Los Angeles are unaffiliated, want nothing to do with synagogues. That number's only growing, right? So well over 500,000 Jews in Los Angeles that want nothing to do with organized Jewish life. It's an opportunity, I think, for us here at the Skirball. One of the things that drew me here. But I think that to your point and your question about spirituality and monotheism, at least, I think spirituality, I think, is a very loaded term. It's become a very loaded term because we all have our idea of what that means, but we all have different ideas of what it means, right? So, right, I'm a little with you. For you, it's candles. For me, it's crystals. Like, and I could, I could tap a ultra Orthodox Jew on the Brea this morning who would tell me that he is this very spiritual person, and that spirituality is exemplified and demonstrated and nurtured in his daily practice of the traditional liturgy. So I think, right, the flip side of that also is people who say to me, "Well, Rabbi, I'm religious. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual." I don't know what that means. To me, what that means is, okay, like you are religious, you just don't want to call it that, so you're going to call it spiritual.
I have some ideas about what it is,
right?
or what it could be. And
Well,
Gandhi first. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say what I think. This conversation, though, is so deeply Jewish, which gets to the monotheistic point, which is to say, and I spent a lot of time, continue to spend a lot of time. One of my passions is working with people who are not yet Jewish and want to learn more about Judaism. In some cases, that leads to them formally joining the family of the Jewish people. In some cases, not. I rethought, created a whole new pathway to becoming a part of the Jewish family, and I'm going to be launching a new conversion program in the fall. But one of the things that is like earth-shattering for people who are not Jews by accident, as people who are coming to this as adults, is that there is no theological dogma in Judaism other than monotheism.
Right.
The Shema, right? One God. But it doesn't tell you anything that you must believe about that oneness.
God.
Right? And so the idea of like, oh, Rabbi, tell me about Jewish theology. It's really tell me about Jewish theologies. I mean, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of Jewish theologies. And that is not unique to the liberal and progressive end of the Jewish spectrum. That's across them. That's just as true in the Orthodox world. Um, and because there is no prescribed, you must believe this, that creates this space and freedom for us, each of us, to, you know, have our own theology. And as I said earlier, for that to change and adapt and evolve as we change and adapt and evolve in our different life experiences, so on and so forth. And it also speaks to Judaism, for better or worse. The church's ancient critique of Judaism was it was deed, not creed. That it privileged behavior over belief. I agree. I just don't think it's a critique. Judaism is far more concerned with how we live our lives, how we treat other people, how we engage in the world around us, and what we believe. Which also is sort of the de-emphasizing uh, of a theology, right? Not to say it's not important, but it's not the most important. And so I think all that's a very long way of saying, I think that creates the space for this. Okay, so I don't believe that, God gave the Torah, to Moses at Mount Sinai, here you go, ready made. But I'm very spiritual, right? Which could mean that I simply believe that there is something in the world, some force, some energy in the world that is greater than I am.
That's fair.
That's why I usually say to people when they tell me they don't believe in God is I much kinder than I'm about to say to you. I usually say something like, really, really, you believe there's nothing in the world greater than you. The entire world revolves around you, right? Society, the country, right? There's nothing greater than you. And people generally say, no, of course I do. Okay, well, don't tell me you don't believe in it. You absolutely believe in something beyond yourself, right? The universe, whatever, right? And that's really, to me, all theology is simply saying, there's something greater than me than just little me. Beyond that is all, up for interpretation in one of those 9 million different theologies we can have. And so to me, I think in that space, while there are nuances, I think spirituality or religious or theological are, at least in my mind, largely synonyms.
You said something interesting: creed versus deed, and I often kind of thought that Gandhi's idea of spirituality, of the pursuit of truth or fairness, nonviolent means, is in fact an action that is highly spiritual. It's the sort of the joke about the candles and the crystals. That, and I just, in terms of comparative religion, I see the at the end of sunset, the self-realization, fellowship, which to me is a very inward thing, like go look within yourself to find truth and meaning. And I think that's very comfortable for a middle class kind of American mindset, because it doesn't put any obligation on them. But
it's also incredibly Jewish, right? This idea of going within oneself. My father is I'll pick on him a little bit, is fond of asking me, they have no idea how they raised the kid who wanted to be a rabbi. I came home and told them I was going to go to rabbinical school, and they choked on their Chardonnay and looked at each other, thought, where did we go wrong? To Santa Barbara, we had a Christmas tree. We didn't really have any Jewish friends. Like, what? They are now blissfully happy and proud of their son. Is, if you ask my mother, like any good Jewish mother, I'm the greatest spiritual leader of the 21st century.
Well, that's good.
But, right, yeah, I'm the only rabbi in the world. My father's fond of saying to me, like, what kind of God needs us to pray, right? Or do you really believe that God needs or listens to our prayers? And my response is usually more or less the same, which is that I don't pray for God, I pray for me, right? And to your point about the Self-Realization Center, or this idea of going within oneself. The um, the Hebrew word for prayer is hipalel, which is a reflexive verb. It literally means to go inside oneself.
Hmm.
Yes, we have prayers that are bakashot, that are requests, but the overwhelming majority of Jewish prayers are not asking for anything. They are expressions of gratitude. But it's an internal process, act, by and large. I think far more than an external one.
But there's another side of it, in my view. And we meeting Bernard Lafayette, um, and there's a huge exhibit. I think it's still there at
Yep,
the
this light of ours, yeah,
about these.
here through the end of February.
Yeah, that these people that were pursuing a spirituality that was rooted in the pursuit. I don't even like to use the word justice. I just like to use the word fairness, because you can say fairness, even a kid on the sandbox could relate to if he's got more toys than the other kid
Yes.
next to him. And so I think both are powerful ideas of spirituality. And one makes a demand on people that is a little more difficult. That's why people like Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and Gandhi, who inspired them all, in my view. That to me is another view of spirituality, which brings me to the Skirball Center, which to me, as I drive through the 405 and look at that monumental monument to Jewish success in Southern California and Los Angeles in all its variations, it's a beautiful structure. It sort of runs in defiance to the deeper and older narrative of Jewish victimhood, which I feel like is feeling a tremendous resurgence because of recent events, October 7th specifically. That's something I kind of want to get into, because I want to talk about Israel. I want to talk about October 7th, and I want to talk about this kind of tradition of victimhood. My own mother was born in Germany, but came to this country with her father as a little girl and was tremendously successful. I personally didn't really experience anti-Semitism, but the generation before me, some of them were in concentration camps. I guess the only maybe anti-Semitism I felt was from my baseball coach, Taft, who I felt didn't like me because I was smart ass and funny and Jewish, like those people. They called.
Bill, that had nothing to do with being Jewish. That was just you.
Could have been, yeah. I made the case for anti-Semitism. That was like my joke. I used to talk about my aunt. She will remain nameless. But anyway, you're there at this incredible institution. It feels. Just your thoughts about that, because there's some big cross currents.
Yeah,
underneath.
it's interesting too, because and even predating October 7th, really going back, one could argue maybe to Charlottesville,
Mm-hmm.
and that march, where we saw, flagrant anti-Semitism in a way that we really haven't in this country, probably since the days of the Klan, really.
Right.
So in some ways, my perspective, like many of ours, has necessarily changed. In many ways, it hasn't. Which is to say, I 100% agree that we have historically, I would go so far as to say, embraced this identity and narrative of Jews as victims. The glaring exception having been founding the State of Israel, which was in direct contrast, if not opposition, to this idea of Jewish victim. We're not going to be victims, right? We're not going to be the Eastern European, Nebushi, bookish. We're going to be the strong, tan, desert, gever, and this creation of the identity of the new Jew, right? And our destiny being within our hands, and all the rest. But I think that you're 100% right that, for valid and understandable reasons, not the least of which being the Holocaust. This identity of we are this persecuted people who have been hated, who have been uh, persecuted and discriminated against time and time again, um, and has been the governing identity for Jews, and certainly for a post-Holocaust generation. Um, thankfully, I suppose, no, I don't have any folks in my family who either survivors or that I know of who died in the Holocaust. But that narrative of, they killed Bubby and Zadie, so be Jewish, I think was moving to the first generation removed. I don't think prior to October 7th, the narrative of victimhood, anti-Semitism, oppression, to your very point, resonates for a Jewish kid from the Valley who, could drive down Ventura Boulevard in Tarzana and assume that the entire world is Jewish, and right, has never experienced, right? Or, I mean, I remember right, exactly, right? I remember years ago teaching our seventh graders, and these were a bunch of kids, like Harvard Westlake and Crossroads and Brentwood and Archer and Marymount, I mean, the Brentwood School, smart kids. And I said, so what percentage of the world do you think is Jewish? And one of them said, 60. I said, no, it's a little less. And another one said, 40. I said, then try again. And then someone said, well, it can't be less than 25. I said, well, it's 1/4 of 1%. They're not stupid. 60% of their world is Jewish. Right? 60% of their school is Jewish. 60% of the block they live on in West LA is Jewish. They live in a world where you go to the Ralphs, down the street, the grocery store down the street, and there's a mountain of Passover stuff. And the checkout girl can say Manischewitz perfectly.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that in most of the country, there's special ordering matzah for Passover.
Right.
We live in this place where, in my old neighborhood, it's not even a Jewish neighborhood. The gas station on the corner sells kosher sandwiches and it's closed on the high holy days. Like it's, or LAUSD, for example, is right off school for the high holy days. So that narrative of Jew as victim rings hollow for a generation that hasn't really experienced that kind of anti-Semitism, and who live in a world in which being Jewish is relatively normative. And for that generation, I have long said, again, prior to October 6th, but I think this still holds true, that the narrative of doom and gloom is not going to inspire our kids to embrace Judaism. Even after October 7th, it's not. It's the positive narrative of, what does Judaism have to offer the world? What has Judaism offered the world? What does Judaism have to offer you in your life to make it richer and more beautiful and more meaningful, every single day? And that positive narrative is what I think to a certain extent is lacking, but what is really going to hopefully speak to, a younger generation of Jews, again, for whom anti-Semitism rings hollow. And I think that's true even in this post-October 7th world. Yes, we've seen, following 10/7, we've seen increased attendance at synagogues. We've seen, surprisingly, more people express an interest in converting to Judaism, which is just incredible, right? But I'm not sure that that's really a response to the hate, or a response to, in the face of that hate, I'm going to show my pride. I'm going to demonstrate that positive Jewish narrative as an antidote to the darkness and the hate and the anti-Semitism. And I think that's so much of what we really are about here at the Skirball Center is telling the story of the positive Jewish narrative. there is absolutely a place for the, you know, uh, history of anti-Semitism oppression of the Holocaust, right? We have the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust, right? We have the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Museum of Tolerance, and I cannot give Rabbi Heyer enough uh, credit and admiration, respect for the unbelievable work that he has done in his life now, having recently retired. I think we are decidedly not, the Wiesenthal Center. Um, and and yes, the Holocaust is addressed in our core exhibition, but it's one piece of it, and we are much more about showing Jews how good and amazing America. Jews have been in America 370 years. This year, 2024 is the 370th anniversary of Jews coming to America. Right, radically different than any other place Jews have ever lived. And then also showing, our non-Jewish brothers and sisters what Jews in these 370 years have contributed to America. Those two stories, I think, are very intertwined, and I think both matter. But I think that the more we can talk about positive narrative, um, because to be Jewish, I believe, has to mean more than simply being an anti-Semite. That's not,
Not
that's
enough.
not right. It's not enough. And,
No.
and again, maybe it's enough if your grandparents, were survivors, or maybe it's enough if your grandparents, God forbid, were not survivors but died, killed. But it's just not enough because it doesn't actually. There's no value add to it. And to me, all religious traditions, but certainly Judaism is what I'm most familiar with, to me, is really just a toolbox to add richness and meaning and purpose and depth, and beauty to one's life and to our world.
There's like a line in a script that I wrote that I filmed that there was a sort of a Marianne Williamson character, and she said, "The trick is not to find the meaning of life. The trick is to find meaning in your own life." And that's doable. The meaning of life, the big scientists have yet to crack that.
But I would argue it's a fruitless question because the meaning of life to me and the meaning of life to you may be totally different.
Yeah.
Right? I forget who said it. Right, my colleague, Rabbi Steve Leader, used to quote this often. I can't remember who it is, but the meaning of life is that it ends.
That gives it meaning.
Right. And it is. I think that is one answer, right? That religious traditions, I think, are also a direct response to that fact, to the fact of our own mortality. So, what do we do with our lives, knowing that they will end?
I wanted to dovetail back because I don't even want to say my age, but in 1967, I was 11 years old, and I do remember that surge of kick-ass fucking pride
Yep.
about Moshe Dayan and beating back those Arab armies.
I mean, the eye patch doesn't hurt, right? I mean,
yeah, my friend took a name, David Patch. He used to be Millerkowski, but he needed a shorter name because he was an actor in a movie, and he named himself. Mel Brooks said, "Name yourself after that general, so you're David Patch." It was Moshe Dayan's Patch. I remember the surge of, I'm a kid, I don't really get it, but we kicked ass.
Yep.
Wow. And then also Sandy Koufax threw 4 friggin' no-hitters and took the Dodgers to the World Championship. I go, that's an image of Judaism that I want to be. I don't want to be that wimpy, hey, the shtetl Jew with the tailor. After all, the Jews that built Israel those Zionist pioneers were anti-shtetl. They were in a rebellion of their own family to assert a newer kind of identity, I thought. And that was powerful. And in my own lifetime, I felt that. I still feel it. I try to live in defiance of those stereotypes.
Well, so I'm going to turn this on you. I have a question for you.
Go.
I wholeheartedly agree, right? And this pride of Israeli soldiers, and my wife will tell you that when she met me, she had recently been on a birthright Israel trip, and she was still in love with the Israeli soldier that was in charge of guiding their bus around, right? That every young girl from the valley who went on the birthright Israel trip fell in love with some tan tone strapping Israeli, right? Um, but I certainly grew up with this, you know, sense of the invincibility of the IDF, right, as the best trained, strongest army on the planet, and that sense of pride coming from '67, coming from so many other wars. How do you think that has changed for you, for anyone, for any of us, um, post 10/7, when it'll all come out in the wash at some point with an investigation? But I don't think it's an overstatement to say that it could be argued that Israel kind of got caught with their pants down.
It did, can't be argued. It happened. It's
Right.
obvious. It did happen. There's no debate there, and that goes to another issue that is sort of is ancillary to the one I just described. Is that sometime between 1967 and this moment, Israel went from an underdog in its neighborhood to an overdog,
Yeah.
which there's one thing to be with the Moses clan, it's another thing to maybe be in bed with the Pharaoh.
Right, I
And
mean that right to get to back to the first question about victimhood, which narrative we have. The right, I think it breaks down largely around age and in generational lines. But to those who are old enough to remember, or to those who are not old enough to remember but are students of history, the notion, the idea that Israel is being viewed through this lens of oppressor, right? That is um, the oppressor, and that others are the victim, um, is like a mind warp for so many. Um,
and
what world are we living in, right? In which Israel is brought up on genocide charges by South Africa, and Germany is the loudest defender.
that's right. And that cuts to a question: are we a tribal people or a righteous people? Does one villainy necessarily justify another villainy? Um,
Well,
those
that gets to Golda Meir's quote, which I love and I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is, we can forgive them for killing our children, but we cannot forgive them for forcing our children to kill theirs.
That's right. Are we? I mean, I'm American. I'm not. I've never been to Israel. I would like to go. Um, but do those young people in Israel have to be sentenced to a lifetime and their children's lifetime of overseeing a neighboring people that are there? I'm sorry, if it rains on a Palestinian, it rains on a friggin' Israeli. What's fair? What's a way forward? I'm reminded of what Thomas Friedman wrote about, with respect to the calculus that Ben Gurion made. We can be, you can't have all three: Judea and Samaria, meaning the biblical version of Israel, a democracy, and security. You can pick 2 out of 3. And it feels true today. And so the question of what it means to be Jewish right now in relation to this Israel and what's happening there and what's fair is a big one. And I personally don't want to be a tribal Jew. I would like to lean more to what I feel is fair and righteous, because that's the best way forward.
Yeah.
You got to be right in the crosshairs of that debate, of those feelings. Whether it's, I noticed you posted in Instagram the Menachem Begin's ideas about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, shotgun by the door if you were going to talk to Bernard Lafayette, ready at all times. Or this Gandhian idea, this idealistic idea of pursuing fairness, justice. How do we, the nonviolent idea that's expressed in the frigging halls of Skirball? It's tough questions.
Yeah, very tough questions. Just funny thinking back to something you said earlier. Bernard Lafayette Jr., when we were both privileged to be with him, he told me that Dr. King used to call him Little Gandhi.
Right. That's what my script. He's Little Gandhi
And
in Parchment.
I
That's
don't
right.
think to me, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I don't think that you know, seeking peace, pursuing peace, seeking justice, as our scripture commands us to do, is mutually exclusive with, to use the metaphor of Dr. Lafayette, a shotgun by the door, in case shit hits the fan. Right? I hope there's not going to be a major earthquake, but I'm still prepared in case there is. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that what is maybe tragic is the right word. Is that the the overwhelming majority of human beings, right, who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, just want to live their lives and send their kids to school and cook dinner and get along with their neighbors and could care less if you're Jewish or Muslim or Palestinian or Israeli. And it is, as is the case in many corners of our lives, that a relatively small minority that is loud on both sides, and has taken on both sides over the years, um, you know, uh, unfortunate action continues to lead to this stalemate. Really. Because if you look at the reality, right, and keep talking about Tom Friedman, who's pointed out in some of his recent editorials, right, it's like, I don't know, 30% or something of physicians in Israeli hospitals are Arabs.
Right.
Like 20 or 30% of nurses. It's, I mean, people, the story that's not being talked about a lot in terms of the impact of this war in Israel is on the Israeli economy, which is going to take decades to recover. And yes, it is the 400,000 or so reservists who've been called up, and so there's no one to pick the fruit, and there's no one to drive the trucks, and so on and so forth. But it's also that the Israeli economy is dependent on Thai labor, on Palestinian labor, on Israeli Arab labor, in the same way that we here in California are dependent on immigrant labor largely, right? Or um, or Latinx labor, right? And if that suddenly went away, right? That suddenly went away, you couldn't get a meal at a restaurant here because who do you think cooks your food, right?
Right.
We grind to a halt. And so that's just a long way of saying these two worlds, these two communities are already inextricably interwoven. And there was years ago there was a survey done, I believe, of Israeli Arabs. And to be clear, Israel is most certainly a country in which Israeli Arabs are second-class citizens. In fact, that might even be generous, third or fourth-class citizens. And that needs to change. And even given that reality, the overwhelming majority of Israeli Arabs tell you that were there a Palestinian state tomorrow, they're not moving.
Yeah.
Right? They get the same health care despite a second-class citizen. They get the same health care that Israelis do. Life is pretty good, and they're just going to keep on keeping on because that's what any of us want to do. Is just kind of keep on keeping on in most cases. And I think the challenge, which I have no solution to, is how do we give those voices the microphone? How do we help those voices be the loudest voices in the conversation, not Hamas? And you finally hear now, which I think directly speaks to the success of the Israeli offensive in Gaza and moving Hamas from power. I think you can see one barometer of that success is that you now are seeing increasingly Palestinians in Gaza come out vocally. There was some soccer game where somebody tried to start a chant against Israel and turned it into a chant against Hamas, right? Which never would have happened 6 months ago because there'd be consequences. and I think that that those are the voices that um, we want to be lifting up. Um, because I think that look, I think that's the story in countless corners of the globe where you have a majority that is in many ways uh, lives at the whim of a fundamentalist minority.
We saw it
And
in
again,
Russia. We saw it in
yeah,
Russia. The
right,
Bolshevik
right.
was a. We see the power of a
By the way,
highly
it's the same. It's the same on the Israeli side to a certain extent. It's certainly
exactly
the same on the Israeli side when it comes to religion, right? I mean, in Israel, you have an overwhelming majority of secular Jews who might be, were the option really there, liberal or progressive Jews, and their religious life is dictated to them by an ultra orthodox religious establishment. It's the same in Iran, where you have
right.
right people, large majority of people who are relatively liberal or secular Muslims, and their religious life is dictated to them by a fundamentalist minority that says you have to be in appropriate dress when you leave their house. Um,
Yes, I might add that.
so I think that it's
Go ahead.
easy to lose sight of that, particularly at the moment. It's it's easy to lose sight of that, and yeah, it's just tragic.
We've seen historically where this highly passionate, over-motivated minority can overwhelm a nation. Like you say, the Shiites or whatever the Islamic actually, in Iran, the Bolsheviks in Russia, even, the Hamas in Gaza. I would say that Palestinians are as much or more victims of the actions of Hamas as the Israelis.
Absolutely.
And
They've been hostages of Hamas for 18 years.
I think that's an important way to talk about it for Jewish people. So
Yes.
my how I would when I try and get into this, cautious, but I would say, first of all, I would say that the Palestinian people are as much victimized as by Hamas as the Israelis are, maybe more.
Absolutely.
And then I would say Israel has an absolute right to its own existence, has an absolute right to defend itself, and has an absolute obligation to pursue a fair result with its neighbors. When it rains on a Palestinian, the same raindrops hit an Israeli. Figure it fucking out, okay? That's the message from America from my point of view. And that's the message from Bill. Sadly, nobody's listening to me, but that's sort of where I come down on this.
I could not agree with you more. And I think the frustration that many of us feel is this, once again, sense that Israel is being asked to hold itself to a standard that no other nation would. Right? I had our nanny, who's from Colombia, a few days after October 7th, asked me, um, she said, I'm reading the news and watching movies. Like, but can you just tell me what happened? Like, simply. And I said, sure. So I kind of laid out for her just the empirical facts of what happened and the breach of the border and the massacres and the hostages and killing. Just the facts that I don't believe are in dispute. And her response, she said, okay, well, I think I understand. It's sort of as if the Sinaloa drug cartel was lobbing rockets into La Jolla and then came across the border, killed 40 or 50,000 people, and then took 2 or 3,000 with them back into the mountains in Mexico. And I paused for a second and I said, wow, actually, yes, that's exactly what it's like. And then she looked at me with this genuine um, expression of, of kind of dumbfounded and said, I don't understand. Like, what's the problem here. How long do you th- how long do you think it would take the United States to completely just, you know, scrape all of Mexico, clean if that were actually to happen and transpire? She said, like, 48 hours. She said, and what are people faulting, Israel for? And that's the extreme example, but I think there is this sense of, yeah, if it were you and it were your country, nobody would be arguing restraint. That doesn't in any way diminish the loss of Palestinian civilians' lives.
Right. Well,
And it is without a doubt Hamas who has put those civilians in the crossing.
exactly. But Israel is held to a different standard, and it always
Always
has,
has
and it
been.
always will be. Hey, if
Yeah.
the Zionists had picked, Nicaragua, they wouldn't
Madagascar,
be
yeah.
worried about it if they beat the hell out of some of the local tribes. But no, they're in Israel and they're in Jerusalem. It's the focus of our Western civilization. I think it was Thomas Friedman who said this, but the people in Asia could care less. It's not the focus of their history and their origin stories like it is for the West. So that's the fact. I don't know. I mean, I'm not in the State Department. I have no power, but they have to deal with it. They cannot allow this inequity and unfairness to persist and subject every generation of Jewish youth to patrolling streets in territories, in my view. It also has put at risk, like you said, the economy, the patents, the medicine, all the great triumphs of Israeli science and industry are now at risk because of an inability to come to some sustainable way forward with its neighbors who are not all evil. So that's my wanted to say it because I felt like I had to get it out of my mouth.
Absolutely. And it is, I think, the Western world certainly is kidding itself if it doesn't think that this is its war too. Right.
Right.
Right. Because it's playing out, right? But this is, just as it was for the US and ISIS or the Taliban. I mean, this is fundamentalist terrorists against, not even necessarily democratic, but certainly elected government.
In an effect, an imperfect Western state, as Ukraine
Right.
is.
Correct.
Thomas Friedman just wrote about it, that there is a sort of a larger
Yes, he did, right? Yes,
Yeah.
and he put Ukraine and Russia in it as well. These two conflicts are linked, I think it's fair to say, and everyone in the world does, whether they realize it or not, have a vested interest in how these things play out. And right now, look, we're lucky in a way. I would say that Israel's fighting the fight for us.
Well, my hope is that there is a creative way forward
Yes,
that
sir.
not drenched in violence. I take inspiration from some of the non-Jewish leaders, one of whom is still with us, Reverend James Lawson, who I'm actually friendly with. I would like to talk to him about this because, what is the way forward? What's the creative path forward? And is it just with governments, or do individuals have an obligation to reach out too? I feel like you're doing it from where you are at the Skirball.
One of my favorite lines, and there's an analogous to it actually in the rabbinic tradition. Lo alecha ham lahali mor v'lo ata ben porim. That you're not obligated to complete the work, but you can't avoid it either. But better said by a little boy named Nkosi Johnson. At the time, Nkosi was the youngest child in Africa living with HIV, like International AIDS Conference or something. And he implored everyone to do as much as they could in the place that they were with the time that they had. And that's all any of us can do. Is we can try to repair what's broken in our little corner of the world. in our family, in our community, in our neighborhood. And that's what we're trying to do here at the Skirball is, do what we can to tell the stories, Jews and all other peoples, to everyone who comes in the door, to help us all see our shared humanity. And whether we like it or not, or choose to recognize it or not, like we are all in this life and in this world together. Um, and we should start acting like it.
Well, I want to thank you for the time. We finally made it happen. We've been
My
doing
pleasure.
the Zoom dance. Quick question about the Skirball, and we're having a rabbi. I don't think they've had a
Yes.
rabbi there. Does that mean there's a congregation and services?
No, it does not. It absolutely does not. The Skirball is is a Jewish cultural center. It is not a theological institution. It So we did have, for example, a Shabbat service, a Shabbat dinner this past Friday in conjunction with a new installation piece that we've acquired called Common Ground, which brings together earth materials from all 56 U.S. states and territories.
Mm-hmm.
The artists combined all those to make a clay of sorts and then created 56 place settings using this amalgamation of materials with the mandate that it be used to bring together diverse groups of people. And so we chose for the first activation of this piece to do it in the context of a Shabbat dinner. But as most of us know, there's not any theological behind a Shabbat dinner. I am really here to help us be as intentional as possible in the ways in which Jewish culture, Jewish tradition, Jewish ritual is exemplified in what we do. Whether it's the way you're greeted when you come onto the campus, we talk a lot about being guided by this Jewish value of welcoming the stranger. Are we really doing that and making good on that? To an upcoming project, which is going to be to reimagine our core permanent exhibition, which is really focused on Jewish life. Our collection is of about 30,000 artifacts. And like any museum, a very small percentage of those are on display. But what story are we going to choose to tell using the objects that we choose to do? Our adult and public programs often are related to Jewish content or have overt Jewish content. So helping to be a thought partner to think through those. And again, we're being intentional in the way we do it. I'm doing some teaching myself. Started a book club last night, actually germane to our conversation. It's called A Year in Israel in Print. And so we're going to spend the year reading 6 different works, all connected to Israel from different perspectives, fiction, nonfiction, memoir, poetry, from Palestinian authors, from Israeli authors, to sort of deepen our conversation about all this. It is a new position. Yes, as you pointed out, there have been others here, including our founder, Dr. Uri Hersher, who were ordained rabbis. There's never been someone here whose job it was to be a Jewish leader, per se, or to be a rabbi. So we are kind of making it up as we go along, but that's part of the fun.
Well, I think they're in good hands with you. And I want you to take comfort in the fact that the square footage at Skirball probably is double what you would have inhabited at CAA. So congratulations. Had your life gone down another road. So I just want to, thank you for this time. Invite people to check out the Skirball, the exhibits as they roll through there. Follow Rabbi Beau's Instagram page. He's got the Torah tidbits. He's dealing the wisdom from the oldest text to the youngest people every day.
At Rabbi Shapiro on Instagram.
Yeah, he's finding meaning in some of the oldest stuff ever written. So check him out there. I want you to stay on after I stop the recording, just so we can bid adieu. But thanks for your time, your wisdom. Until next time, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean namasaloha. See ya.